trial of the prosecutor against Dominic Ongwen continued from 1st May until 24th May 2018 at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. During this time, a total of 7 witnesses were called by the legal representatives of victims to give their testimony before the chamber in relation with the Lord's Resistance Army and Dominic Ongwen. The alleged former commander of the Senior Brigade of the LRA is accused of 70 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity allegedly committed during a widespread and systematic attack directed against the civilian population of northern Uganda from at least 1st July 2002 to 31st December 2005, including the attacks against the civilian population in Lokodi, Bajule, Odek, and Abok IDP camps between October 2003 and June 2004. Since opening its case on 16 January 2017, the prosecution has called 69 witnesses. On the 12th of April 2018, the prosecution concluded presenting its witnesses before the chamber. During the presentation of the prosecution case, witnesses are first questioned by the Office of the Prosecution, then by the legal representatives of victims, and finally by the defense. Mr. Ongwen is represented by a team led by Defense Counsel Crispus Ayana Odon. The defense conducts its own investigations and has the right to examine prosecution witnesses. During this evidentiary block, 1st May till 24th May 2018, legal representatives of victims began presenting its witnesses before the chamber. The witnesses are first questioned by 2 teams of the legal representatives of victims, then by the prosecution, and finally by the defense. There were 7 witnesses called by the LRVs. 3 were victims of the attacks, while 4 were expert witnesses. According to the prosecution, the LRA adopted a policy of attacking and abducting civilians, including those living in protected internally displaced persons camps, or IDPs. 3 witnesses came to testify about such attacks in the IDP camps. Protected witness V0002 testified about his life in Abok IDP camp, his abduction, training in the LRA, his escape from the bush, and his experiences after he escaped. He was first questioned by the legal representatives of victims, Joseph Akwenyo Manoba, and then by the defense. The Office of the Prosecution did not take to the floor to examine the witness. Witness V0002 confirmed that he lived in a Abok IDP camp and was abducted on 8th June 2004 by LRA soldiers at the age of 12. The witness was questioned about the day of his abduction.
You mentioned that this is the day when you were abducted. Where were you when they actually found you?
I was sleeping inside the house on that day. I had a cold that day. I started feeling a bit sick around 3 p.m. So I went and lay down. When I was lying down, I fell asleep. About 8 p.m., it was already dark. I woke up and started hearing gunshots. I left the bed and realized I was the only one who had remained in the house. The door was open, everybody had fled. I also came out and decided to flee, but one person came from behind the house and held my hands. When he held my hands, I thought it was one of the government soldiers who was trying to rescue me. He held my hands and took me under some tree and found so many people who had been abducted and put there. 4 of the people were guarding us, and houses were being burnt from the camp. For us, we were seeing from the side. We could still hear gunshots going on. When they guarded us for almost 20 to 30 minutes, one of the guards fired shots up, and those who were in the camp came to us. When they came back to us, they started telling us to leave very fast and move. They herded us, and we were half running, half walking, while they were beating us. One of the women was crying, talking about a child which had remained behind. They asked the woman, "Do you want to rest?" Then they got the woman and cut her neck, and she died. They told us that whoever starts misbehaving will die like that woman.
He also recounted that on his abduction day, he saw for the first time someone being killed in front of him, and he felt fear. Once he was abducted, the witness testified that he was trained to assemble a gun and shoot a target. He was also forced to kill.
Were you forced at any time to kill a person?
Yes, there was a time I was forced and I killed a person. I was given to kill a person who had escaped and was re-abducted, and I was picked because I was young, so that was meant for me to be used to know what to do, and I was informed if I escape I would also be killed. So they gave me to kill this person as a way of instilling that fear in me.
And how did this make you feel?
Because of the life in the bush, it scared me. But when I did it, and after that, I forgot about it. Regarding his escape and life after LRA, witness V0002 testified that he escaped from the bush on 14th October 2006. He recounted how he ended up in the village he lived before the Abok IDP camp and how he found his family again. When asked about his experiences readjusting back into the community after the bush, the witness explained that he was stigmatized and felt angry.
When I went to school, the pupils who were present in the church the day I was being introduced all turned to look at me, and everywhere I was passing, they would call me rebel. They would call me adui in our language, which means rebel. And then many of the pupils started calling me rebel. Throughout the school, everyone was calling me rebel. So one day, the head teacher summoned me to his office, and he asked me, why are the pupils following you all the time? And I told him that they are only stigmatizing me and telling me that I am a rebel. The teacher started asking me that I should tell him how life was in the bush. And then I refused to tell him. He persuaded me to tell him how life was in the bush. He picked 500 shillings and gave me as a bait. Then I decided to tell him. I started telling him how life was in the bush. When I was telling him, he told me to leave. He told me to leave his office and go away. I indeed left. When I left, I went home.
Regarding the impact of the LRA experiences in his life, The witness recognized that after he came from the bush, he was aggressive and he expressed his desire to be provided with psychological support and also with assistance to finish his studies.
If you look back, what would you say is the effect of the abduction that you suffered on your life?
It ruined my life. Right now, my age mates who went to school have a source of livelihood. I also wanted to be like them. When I was young, I had so many ambitions. But when I was abducted, all my dreams were shattered. I couldn't go to school. And my life is a total mess. Right now, I beg for help. I beg for things if I want to get something. If this did not happen to me, I would be somewhere right now.
When asked about what he expects from the court, the witness said,
"What does it mean to you to be able to tell your story to the court?"
I am happy that I am finally sharing my story with the court because this is my experience. This is what I went through.
And finally, what do you expect from this court? What would you expect from this court?
My expectation is for justice. That is all.
Witness V0002 was questioned by the defense before concluding his testimony. Another witness, Mr. Vincent Oyet, also testified about the attacks at IDP camps. Mr. Oyet, a teacher in Lokodi Primary School, testified about what he witnessed before and after the 2004 Lokodi attack. He was first questioned by the legal representatives of the victims, Francisco Cox, and then by the defense. The office of the prosecutor did not take to the floor to examine him. Mr. Oyet first talked about an assumed LRA attack in the school in Lokodi around 2002. The witness recounted that food was looted, people were abducted, and the situation was considered dangerous. The witness also testified about the Lokodi attack aftermath.
Asking you to describe to the court how the building of the school was and the compound of the school, what happened there. What did you see after the attack of 2004, of course?
After the attack, the school was destroyed. The trees around the school and the trees in the school ground had been chopped. The people who were living in the camps had cut down the trees. The school ground was completely bare, and that also had a lot of repercussions because there were no trees around the school. There was also a camp in the school. The toilets that were being used, the pit latrines that had been dug by the people who were living in the camps, there was rubbish, a rubbish pit. They also dug up the school ground to use as a rubbish pit, so it was not very easy. And it wasn't very hygienic for the students as well. The road, there was a road in the school where the children would play. So when children were playing, it would create problems as well. The teachers' quarters had been destroyed. All of them had been destroyed. I recall one house that was there, one big house that was there, was the head teacher's house. That house was completely destroyed.
Mr. Oyet also answered questions by the defense before concluding his testimony. Similarly, Gibson Okulu also testified about Lokodi attacks. Mr. Kulu, who was known as witness V0004, testified about his life before and after the Lokodi attacks. He testified that in 1988 he was elected as the local councillor 1 in his community in Lokodi, a position which he still holds till today. Regarding the LRA attacks in Lokodi, the witness said that LRA entered, surrounded, attacked and burnt the camp. The witness said that he ran away and returned the next day to find that his son died. He also added that the LRA pillaged the camp and took away, among other things, goats and chicken. Regarding the after effect of the attack on him and other residents, Mr. Kulu confirmed he and others were indeed affected by the events till today, and he added that some members of the community are afraid to go to Lokodi and are also afraid that Lokodi will be attacked again. He also explained about the impact of the Lokodi attacks on his community.
I have some questions now about the lasting impact of the conflict on your community. So focusing on that period from around 2007 up until today, can you tell us whether you notice signs of psychological... Mr. Gibson, if you need a glass of water, there is some water there for you. Are you okay for me to continue?
Yes, go ahead.
As a leader in the community in Lokodi, have you observed any signs of lasting psychological problems from the conflict or the attack on Lokodi?
It is evident because the trauma of what happened in Lokodi affected so many people. Some people are psychologically affected. Up to now, there is general fear, and there is the fear of a repeat of what happened in Lokodi. There is still a lot of trauma in the community. People are economically deprived, and people have not gone back to what used to be in the past. There is a lot of despair, and people are not sure whether what took place then will not take place again.
If what happened had an impact on the social cohesion of the community, do people live differently together? Do they behave differently amongst each other and towards each other since the time when the attack happened?
Yes, there is. In the past, people would come together like in a cooperative society to do things together in the community. They would go farming together and they would have a lot of activities that was done communally. But with what took place, people fear coming together. They fear that when you're found living together, they will finish you like they finished people in the past. And they fear that when you're like 5 or 10, you can all be taken. In the past, people used to farm for livelihood when there was still... people became afraid during the insecure situation. When they find you farming, they would cut off your arm, they would maim you, and for that matter, people now fear farming.
The witness also testified about assistance needed for his community.
Of assistance that you think the community still needs today in order to recover from the attack in 2004?
A lot of assistance is needed because, as I said before, there is no way for people to go back to their original way of life. It's difficult. right now we are in a situation where people are not even to build their own homes. It's difficult to get money, even to get some good meals for the family is getting difficult because the kind of items that people had before are no longer there. You have to look out for support and help, but also you find that if you look out for those handouts, they may not be enough to help you. So what we need to do is, if we can do our own, but also we also need to reach out to people to help, that would be useful.
Are you able to tell us on behalf of your community what the people in Lakoti hope for from this court?
The people believe that if the court would be helpful, then their life should be rehabilitated so that at least there is some stability. Because each and everyone back home at least have lost someone into the war. We know that it's difficult. There's no price for a human being. Even an individual, myself, anyone, it's difficult to put a price. But if the court could help in rehabilitating and supporting the people to restore their life, then the court should help us. People are hopeful that if the court can help to restore their life, to rehabilitate what has gone bad, that should be okay. They believe and they hope that this court will help them so that they become and restore their normal life and also their future. That is their appeal to the court.
4 expert witnesses came to testify before the chamber about various topics such as mental health and well-being of victims of attacks in northern Uganda. Expert witness Ms. Atim Teddy, a researcher whose prior written report was introduced into evidence, testified about what happens to victims during violent occurrences in armed conflict in northern Uganda, as well as how these same victims recover in all areas of their lives. Ms. Atim's report focused on Abok, Lokodi, and Odek victims of attack. While answering questions from the legal representatives of victims, Francisco Cox, about her report, she testified about psychological well-being of the victims of attacks.
What were your conclusions regarding the psychosocial well-being of our clients?
Of course, what we found, which I think we also have as part of on the slide, we found that first of all, the more war crimes and crimes against humanity somebody experienced, the poorer or the worse their psychosocial well-being. And we also found that women tended to report a much higher experience of report poorer psychosocial well-being overall, because they were likely to show greater depression and anxiety, and more report, of course, more lower pro-social skills, and report more like somatic complaints overall. That is what we found. And of course, we also found that there were some specific serious crimes that were very related to psychosocial experience, and things like extensive destruction of one's property, having a child injured or abducted or killed were very related to a much higher or poorer psychosocial well-being in the population.
Ms. Atim also testified about how the attacks affected victims in various ways, such as physically accessing health care, their level of wealth compared to others, their education access. The witness also talked about social protection, as well as continued victimization of women who had children out of sexual violence. She also added that the general message from the victims she interviewed was,
when I spoke to people, a lot of what I heard was about, we need what happened to us to be recognized. We need the people responsible held accountable.
And another question that has to do with the experience of crimes and being a victim, but now about crimes afterwards that had nothing to do with the alleged attacks. Your report seems to suggest that the victim population experiences significantly more crimes nowadays even. Why is that so, if it is so?
Yes, that is so. That is what we found. And that has to do with what I had explained earlier, the continued, victimization, stigmatization, isolation that these people continue to experience. That happens. And those, particularly for women, it has to do with the pervasive gender discrimination that is extensive in most of northern Uganda. And, having a child, out of sexual violence, what does that mean for your everyday interaction with others in the community? So we do see a continued pattern of victimization, but also what that means, it seems to mean that these harms seems to multiply over, into other violations or into other experiences of crimes in today's community.
Ms. Atim was later questioned by the defense about several topics, such as how she collected data for her report, the methodology she used in her report, spiritualism in northern Uganda communities, before concluding her testimony. Professor Darren Scott Reiketer, another expert witness, also testified before the chamber. He is a professor of psychiatry and director of the Human Rights in Trauma Mental Health Laboratory at Stanford University. He has experience in areas of cross-cultural trauma psychiatry, and his report is based on mental outcome of victims of rape and other gender-based crimes in Uganda. Professor Reiketer answered questions from Paulina Masida, Principal Counsel of the Office of Public Counsel for the Victims, about his report, which covered various topics such as psychosocial well-being of victims of rape and other gender-based crimes, recovery time of victims and survivors of rape and other gender-based crimes. Professor Reiketer explained how a person with PTSD can affect the entire community because everybody in the social circle of the victim gets affected one way or the other. The witness also discussed the presence or absence of mental disorder symptoms in victims.
And I quote, "The absence of a formal mental health disorder after rape does not suggest total wellness for a victim," end of quote. And again, I would like you to expand a little more on that concept, and particularly, what do you mean when you say that does not suggest total wellness on the part of a victim of rape?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. I try to make this in all of my writing, whether it's for court or for academic publication. I think that some error can be made by readers that if a survivor does not have a formal mental health disorder as categorized by the DSM or some other ICD-9, ICD-10, that therefore they are well, therefore they have not had a damage from the sexual violence event. And I think that that concept is very much wrong, and in the literature, in the science, and in my personal experience of working with victims, it's very rare for someone to be the survivor of rape without having some long-term negative consequence on their psychology.
When you refer to long-term, is that, and I understand that this is a difficult question maybe, but is it possible to have a range, to speak of a range of time which is necessary for a victim to recover to some extent from the consequences of a rape or a sexual and gender-based crime?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer because I think each individual has a different capacity for the chronicity of symptoms. but I am aware of almost no survivor of sexual violence who hasn't had it impact them negatively, chronically. It would be quite remarkable in my experience for someone to be raped and have complete wellness and not think of it as a negative event in their life at any point in their life later.
When asked how victims of rape can reintegrate back into their society, Professor Reiketa said it was challenging and difficult for rape survivors to reintegrate into their family or community, more so if a lady victim has had a child. He confirmed that memory of traumatic events may play vividly in PTSD victims. He also confirmed that victims of sexual and gender-based crimes who testify about the events they went through are stressed. The defense cross-examined the expert witness about his report, mental disorders, the LRA and its beliefs and rituals before concluding his testimony. Professor Michael Gibbs Whistles, a psychologist as well as a professor of clinical health at Columbia University, testified before the chamber. He is a global child protection specialist and has expertise in areas of child protection in war-torn countries all across the world. He worked in Uganda between 1998 till 2006, focusing on holistic protection of children. Professor Whistles answered questions from Paulina Masida, Principal Counsel of the Office of Public Counsel for the Victims, about his report, which covered various topics such as psychosocial well-being of former child soldiers and how to help these children recover and reintegrate back into society when they return from the bush. The witness explained that psychologists in the Western cultures aren't trained to look at local culture when dealing with mental disorders in children who are traumatized, which is important, specifically in the Acholi culture, where culture defines their identity.
We need to locate the problems of war-affected children in their social environment. It is a poisonous social environment, after all, that causes the trauma, the depression, and the everyday distresses. So I submit that it is not very helpful to take an individual-only approach. It is better to take a person, the whole person, in the environment, interacting continuously. And there's no such thing as the effects of war on children, because children, as we know, are all different. Young children may be affected in different ways than teenage children. Girls are affected by armed conflict in ways that are fundamentally different from those of boys, particularly as it relates to rape and crimes of gender-based violence. And in addition, some of the effects of war are culturally constructed. And so Western psychologists, to be honest, are trained not to think so much about local understandings. But if I go to Acholi land and I talk with formerly abducted children, their families, their communities, they want to talk about culture because it is the center of their lives. It defines their identity and it defines some of the effects.
Regarding gender and trauma events, the witness explained in details that girls are affected more than boys. He said that, for example, girls would feel guilty and blame themselves when they are raped or forced into marriage, which leads to depression. The witness concluded that girls face greater stigma than boys, but both genders are stigmatized. When asked about moral development of child soldiers, the witness responded that most child soldiers know the difference between right and wrong, specifically in Uganda, where the child soldiers are victims and perpetrators in the same time. The witness also answered questions about intergenerational transmission of trauma. He said that while there was little research about the issue in Uganda, the fact still remains that it is possible for trauma to be passed from one generation to the next in various ways. Regarding the impact of abductions to the Acholi community, the witness confirmed that abduction caused significant damage to the entire community.
In Acholi land, as in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, children are viewed not only as the responsibility of the family, but as the responsibility of the community. And people define their well-being by the quality of their relationships. For children to be abducted, first of all, means for parents and for community members, we failed. We failed to protect our children. This is a very large responsibility, and it really wears on people. It evokes tremendous fear for the children's well-being, and it keeps people in a state of hypervigilance. They can't calm down. They're constantly worried about the fate of that child. Some of the children die. These are losses. These are losses of members of your clan, your group. They're also losses within the family, and this impacts people. For the community, it means that their next generation, their most precious resources, are being damaged. So the communities themselves view this as a form of damage. And then with regard to problems such as Chen, communities are quite afraid. Young people who come back and who go into unpredictable fits of rage, which is one of the things that Chen can cause. When they see that, they realize they don't just respond with fear. They realize that there is spiritual discord between the ancestors and the living. In Acholi land, it has a very spiritualistic cosmology. People believe that well-being in the visible world is based on harmony with the ancestors and good relations with the spirit world. And so to have this breach going on with the ancestors is very upsetting. It is difficult for Westerners to understand because it just doesn't fit with our belief system. But it is a form of non-well-being. It is a form of pain and agony that is really very deep. And then there were lots of economic losses that came to the community as well. So along with the abductions of the children came lots of attacks and losses of farms and homes, animals. So for all these reasons, communities saw their situation, saw themselves as having been damaged. And then as the war continued, and as people were moved into the so-called protected villages, the IDP camps, elders began seeing that young people no longer respected them, no longer greeted them in the usual culturally appropriate manner. And they started talking about the rift that had arisen between young people and older people within the community. That means that the community is fractured, and that identity, the fabric of Acholi society, their beliefs, their identity, their customs, their culture, was actually degrading and under assault. And again, I think it's hard for Western psychologists like me, it's hard for us to get our head around this because our cultural beliefs and identity are different. But for Acholi people for whom these beliefs are extremely strong, these are the things that elders, for example, and ordinary boys and girls have told me are the most impactful, not on them as individuals, but on their communities.
The witness also testified about the practice of cultural rituals in Acholi culture and how that should be included in the healing and integration process of former child soldiers. The witness explained that for former child soldiers to be fully healed and integrated into their society, not only should there be mental support, but also cultural rituals to cleanse them of all the evil deeds they did while in the LRA.
There are some aspects, if I can put that way, of the Acholi culture that could be useful to help former child soldiers reintegrating in the community. Is that correct? And if this is the case, do you have other examples showing this aspect?
If I could offer a small way of thinking about it, maybe the best treatment is to try to fit together a combination of Western supports for trauma and depression, alongside local supports for things like Chen, and to find ways to enable a more holistic array of supports. I see in many other countries these same dynamics. In Angola, during the war, I was working with a trauma program, and there was a 14-year-old boy who was talking with our team leader, and he said, I can't sleep at night. And so she and I were both thinking, oh, maybe PTSD. And then he said, I can't sleep because the spirit of the man I killed comes to me in the night and asks, why did you do this to me? And so then he was asked, what did he think would help him? And he said, well, where I live, there are traditional healers who can do rituals that cleanse you of this spirit, of these bad spirits, of this spiritual pollution. And so the team I worked with, even though they were working in a Western idiom, they had the courage and the common sense and the respect to begin learning about cultural afflictions. And they actually did ethnography and went for this boy and worked with a traditional healer. And that healer ended up doing a ceremony, a healing ceremony that cleansed the boy. So after about a month of a purifying diet and moral tutelage, the entire village was convened. The healer demarcated a safe space using herbs believed to keep angry spirits out. The boy was asked to take his shirt off, and he was ritually washed with substances believed to expunge bad spirits. He sat on a stool with a towel over his head and was fumigated, inhaling the boiling vapors of herbs that were believed to have purgative properties. An apology was made by the healer to the spirit for any wrongdoing that had been done, and a goat was sacrificed as a means of giving back to the spirit and restoring harmony with the ancestors. And at the end, the healer asked the boy to step out of that space, and as he did so, he announced, this boy's life as a soldier has ended, and now he re-enters life as a civilian, and he can do all the things that we do. I've seen these kinds of rituals and documented them in both Angola and Sierra Leone. I'm also familiar with various rituals in DRC and in Liberia. And so I don't want to say that they're the same everywhere. They are not, but there are certain commonalities that have to do with the wrongdoing that results in bad spirits, the possession and the haunting, and the need for a cleansing ritual that restores harmony between the living and the ancestors. So again, it's not viewed just as an individual problem. It is an individual and a communal problem.
The professor was questioned by the defense about his testimony before he concluded. Professor Sigan Moses Mosisi, an expert witness, also testified before the chamber. He is a psychiatrist as well as professor of psychiatry at Makerere University. He is also a researcher in mental health and consults in different hospitals around Uganda. He answered questions from Paulina Masida, Principal Counsel of the Office of Public Counsel for Victims, about his report, which covered various topics such as psychosocial well-being of former LRA abductees and how to help them recover and reintegrate back into society when they return from the bush. Professor Musisi confirmed that he treated a number of former LRA abductees who suffered from various mental symptoms including PTSD and depression because of the traumatic events they faced during the conflict in northern Uganda. He also confirmed that individuals, including former abductees, express their distress according to their cultural beliefs and experiences, and they would seek help in accordance with their cultural understanding. He explained that actually people might develop mental disorders such as PTSD, which expresses in various ways such as nightmares and flashbacks. They actually would try and explain these symptoms in accordance to their cultural understanding. Hence, they will say those PTSD symptoms are Chen and that they are haunted. He gave examples of several mental disorder symptoms that were shared to him by former abductees when he was treating them.
First of all, as a background, many African societies and many other societies in the world believe in a spirit world. We believe that when people die, they become spirits, which continue to live on amongst us. And Africans believe, including the Acholi, that these spirits of the dead can influence activities of the living. They can cause disease, they can cause famine, they can cause happiness, they can cause sadness. So if wronged, they will come back to haunt that who wronged them. In the case, for example, of a wrongful death, they may come back to avenge or to seek rectification of what went wrong, or even attack you. It is these beliefs which the Acholis would express in terms of the symptoms they were feeling as a result of having experienced trauma. In Acholi land, a lot of that was explained as Chen, which means spirits of the dead coming back. If they are good, they'll be Tipo. If they were bad, they were Chen. But it's simplistic to equate PTSD to Chen because the situation is a lot more complex. Spirits do a lot more than just causing PTSD. Even if it was a snake bite, one would say, why me? In the whole audience, should I be bitten by this snake? Maybe something is responsible. In the African cosmos, that would be saying that a spirit maybe came in the form of a snake to bite you. It can go on and on. It is the explanation of the worldview of many African states, of communities, including the Acholi. It also includes the belief in witchcraft, that things can be caused from the supernatural. It is difficult sometimes for non-Africans to understand this, but if you think of it in religious terms, a belief in God or the Son, the Holy Ghost, whatever it is that goes with it, and Satan, none of which you see, but people believe in it, build temples, build churches, build mosques, build synagogues. Africans also believe in these spirits as existent in our daily life and influencing our daily activities, including causing disease. So that's how they explained what they were feeling, whether in sleep or in physical health or even in their own environment. Thank you, Mrs. Masida.
The witness also answered questions about burial rites in Acholi culture. He explained that if someone dies and the burial rites aren't observed and conducted properly, the spirit of the dead will come and haunt the relatives, and this will affect their mental and emotional well-being because they will be constantly thinking about their dead relatives. Proper burial rites have to be observed for there to be harmony and peace in the community, the witness added. Professor Mosisi also testified in detail about stigmatization and rejection of children of war, those children born in the bush, confirming that there was difficulty on how society related and accepted those children back into the community. Additionally, the witness discussed in great detail how the values of former abductees have changed when they return home, and this changes the overall traditional Acholi values, which are derailed and are weakened. The defense questioned the witness before he concluded his testimony. The trial in the case of the prosecutor against Dominic Ongwen will resume after the summer recess, with the presentation of evidence by the defense on a date to be announced in due course.